The gunshot that killed Natalie Drake's father echoed through the canyon 3 days before she rode into Marysville, California, on a borrowed mule with nothing but the clothes on her back and a hollow ache in her chest that felt like it might swallow her whole. It was late August in 1874, and the gold rush town had seen better days, its wooden buildings bleached by the sun and its streets thick with dust that coated everything in a fine layer of grit. Natalie had nowhere else to go. Her father's mining claim had been worthless, his debts substantial, and the men who came collecting had made it clear she needed to disappear before they decided she might be payment enough. She was 22 years old and had never felt more alone in her life. The boarding house on Main Street had a sign in the window advertising rooms for let, and Natalie stood outside it for a full 10 minutes before she found the courage to walk through the door. The woman behind the desk was round and gray-haired, with sharp eyes that took in Natalie's worn dress and dusty boots in a single glance. "How much for a room?" Natalie asked, her voice hoarse from 3 days of riding with barely any water. $2 a week. 3 meals included, but you eat what I cook and when I serve it." Natalie counted out the coins from her pocket, her last bit of money in the world. Enough for 2 weeks if she was careful, and then what? She would need to find work, but what could she do? Her father had kept her isolated at the claim, suspicious of other miners and convinced that any day now they would strike it rich. He had taught her to shoot, to skin a rabbit, to pan for gold that never materialized. But he had never taught her the things that might have helped her survive in a place like this. The boarding house keeper pushed a ledger across the desk. "Sign here." Natalie stared at the page, at the incomprehensible lines and marks that other people had made. Her throat went tight. "Can I sign later? My hand is cramped from riding." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, but she pulled the ledger back. "Room 4, top of the stairs. Supper is at 6. Natalie climbed the narrow staircase with her small bundle of possessions, grateful that the woman had not pressed the issue. The room was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and washstand it contained, but it was clean and the door had a lock. She sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry for the first time since her father died, her body shaking with silent sobs that left her exhausted and hollow. She washed her face in the basin and changed into her only other dress, a faded blue calico that had been her mother's. The woman in the mirror looked pale and frightened, and Natalie forced herself to straighten her shoulders. She had survived this long. She would figure out what came next. The dining room was crowded when she came down for supper, mostly men who worked in the remaining mines or on the ranches that stretched across the valley. Natalie took a seat at the end of one long table and kept her eyes down, hoping to avoid attention. The food was plain but plentiful, and she ate mechanically, barely tasting it. "You are new in town." Natalie looked up to find a man sitting across from her. He was older than her father had been, with a thick beard and calculating eyes. "Just arrived today. Looking for work?" "Yes. I run the dry goods store on 2nd Street. Could use someone to help with stocking and such. You can read and figure numbers." The question hit her like a physical blow. Natalie set down her fork carefully. "I have other prospects, but thank you for the offer." The man shrugged and returned to his meal, and Natalie finished eating as quickly as she could before fleeing back to her room. She lay awake most of the night, listening to the sounds of the town, the piano music from the saloons and the occasional shout or burst of laughter. What was she going to do? Every job would require what she could not provide. The secret she carried felt like a stone in her chest, growing heavier with each passing hour. Morning came too soon. Natalie dressed and went downstairs, where the boarding house keeper was serving breakfast. "I need to find work," she said quietly. "Do you know anyone who might be hiring?" The woman considered her for a moment. The Keller Ranch is always looking for hands. They have a big spread about 5 miles west of town. Pay is decent if you do not mind hard work. What kind of work? Whatever needs doing. Cooking, mending, washing. Sometimes helping with the livestock if they are short-handed. It sounded like the kind of work that might not require reading or writing, at least not right away. Natalie borrowed paper and pencil from the boarding house keeper, pretending to write down directions while the woman described the route. Then she set out walking, because she had returned the borrowed mule and could not afford to hire a horse. The sun was already fierce by the time she reached the ranch, and her dress was soaked with sweat. The main house was a sprawling structure of wood and stone, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. Cowboys moved among the horses and cattle, and Natalie could hear the sound of hammering from somewhere behind the barn. She walked up to the house and knocked on the door, her heart pounding. A Mexican woman answered, her face kind but tired. "Yes, I am looking for work. I was told they might be hiring. Wait here." The woman disappeared inside, and Natalie stood on the porch, trying not to fidget. A few minutes later, a man came to the door. He was tall and lean, probably close to her own age, with dark blonde hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter sky. There was something about his face that made her think he smiled easily, though he was not smiling now. "I am Lucas Keller," he said. "This is my family's ranch." "Maria says you are looking for work." "Yes, sir. I can cook and clean, mend clothing, help with animals, whatever you need." Lucas studied her for a moment, and Natalie had the unsettling feeling that he saw more than she wanted him to. "We lost our cook 2 weeks ago." She decided ranch life was not for her and went back east. "Can you cook for 15 men 3 times a day?" "Yes." Natalie had cooked for her father and the occasional visitor to their claim. 15 men would be more work, but she could manage it. Room and board plus $20 a month. You would sleep in the small cabin behind the kitchen. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. The men work hard and they expect decent food. Think you can handle it? $20 a month was more than she had hoped for. "Yes, sir. Start tomorrow. Come at 5 in the morning so Maria can show you where everything is. She has been trying to cook and manage the house, and it is too much for one person." "Thank you, Mr. Keller. I will not disappoint you." He nodded and started to turn away, then paused. "What is your name?" "Natalie Drake." "Welcome to the ranch, Miss Drake." Natalie walked back to town feeling lighter than she had in days. She had work, a place to stay, and a wage that would let her save money. Maybe things were going to be all right after all. The next morning, she arrived at the ranch before dawn, carrying her few belongings. Maria met her at the kitchen door and showed her around, explaining where supplies were kept and what the men liked to eat. The kitchen was well equipped, with a large cast iron stove and plenty of pots and pans. Maria was patient and thorough, and Natalie felt a surge of gratitude toward the older woman. "The men are good workers, but they can be rough," Maria warned. "Do not let them give you trouble. Mr. Lucas will not tolerate disrespect." "How many Keller family members are there?" "Mr. Lucas runs the ranch. His father died 2 years ago and his mother lives in Sacramento with her sister. He has a younger brother, but he went east to study law. So it is just Mr. Lucas now, and he works harder than any 3 men." Natalie stored that information away and set to work making breakfast. She fried bacon and eggs, made biscuits and gravy, and had coffee ready when the men started filing in. They were a mix of ages and backgrounds, cowboys who had worked the ranch for years and newer hands still learning the ropes. They eyed Natalie with curiosity, but kept their comments respectful, possibly because Lucas was sitting at the head of the table watching them with a quiet authority that needed no words. After breakfast, Maria showed Natalie to her cabin. It was small but private, with a real bed and a stove for heat in the winter. Natalie unpacked her belongings, which took all of 5 minutes, and then returned to the kitchen to start preparing the noon meal. The days fell into a rhythm. Natalie cooked 3 meals a day, cleaned the kitchen, and helped Maria with other household tasks when she had time. The work was exhausting but satisfying, and she fell into bed each night too tired to worry about the future. The men seemed pleased with her cooking, and no one had asked her to read or write anything yet. She began to hope that maybe she could keep her secret indefinitely. It was 2 weeks into her employment when Lucas knocked on the kitchen door one evening after supper. Natalie was washing dishes, her arms deep in soapy water. "Miss Drake, do you have a moment?" She dried her hands on her apron. "Of course, Mr. Keller." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I need to place an order with the supplier in Sacramento. Can you go through the pantry and write down what we are running low on? I will send it with the next freight wagon." Natalie felt the blood drain from her face. "I am sure Maria would be better at that. She knows the kitchen better than I do." Maria cannot write English well enough for the suppliers to understand. Her list last time got half the order wrong. He held out the paper and a pencil. "Just make a list of what you need. I will pick it up tomorrow morning." There was no way around it. Natalie took the paper with shaking hands. "Of course." Lucas left, and Natalie stared at the blank page. She went through the pantry mechanically, noting what was low, but when she sat down at the kitchen table with the pencil, her mind went blank. She knew the letters existed, knew that other people could somehow transform thoughts into marks on paper that other people could decipher. But the skill was as foreign to her as speaking Chinese or flying. She tried to remember signs she had seen, the shapes of letters, but her hand would not cooperate. After an hour of frustrated attempts that resulted in nothing but illegible scrawls, she crumpled the paper and buried her face in her hands. She was going to lose this job. Lucas would realize she was worthless, and she would be back where she started, with no money and nowhere to go. Someone knocked on the kitchen door, and Natalie quickly wiped her eyes. It was late, well past the time anyone should be up. She opened the door to find Lucas standing there, a lantern in his hand. "I saw your light still on," he said. "Is everything all right?" "Fine, just finishing up some things." He looked past her to the crumpled paper on the table. "Having trouble with the list." Natalie wanted to lie to make up some excuse, but the weight of the secret was suddenly too much. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being afraid. "I cannot do it," she said quietly. "I cannot read or write. I never learned how. My father did not think it was necessary, and there was no school near the claim. I am sorry I did not tell you before. I understand if you want me to leave." She braced herself for anger or disgust, but Lucas just looked at her with those calm blue eyes. Then he smiled, a slow, warm smile that transformed his entire face. "Then I will teach you." Natalie stared at him. "What?" "I will teach you to read and write. It is not as hard as you think. My mother was a school teacher before she married my father. She taught me and my brother, and I helped teach some of the younger ranch hands. If you are willing to learn, I am willing to teach." "Why would you do that?" "Because everyone should know how to read and write. Because you are a good cook and I do not want to lose you. Because you had the courage to tell me the truth when you could have made excuses." He set the lantern down on the table. "We can start tomorrow evening after supper if you want. An hour a day should be enough." Natalie felt tears prickling her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of despair. "Thank you, Mr. Keller. Call me Lucas. If I am going to be your teacher, we should probably skip the formalities." That night, Natalie lay in bed staring at the ceiling of her cabin, replaying the conversation in her mind. Lucas had not judged her. He had not made her feel stupid or worthless. He had simply offered to help, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. She thought about his smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, and felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. The next evening, Lucas appeared at the kitchen door with a slate and some chalk. "Ready for your first lesson." They sat at the kitchen table, and Lucas started with the alphabet. He wrote each letter carefully, showing her how to form the shapes, patient when she made mistakes. His voice was calm and encouraging, and Natalie found herself relaxing, focusing on the movement of the chalk across the slate. "See, you are doing fine," Lucas said when she successfully copied the first few letters. "It just takes practice." "How long did it take you to learn?" "I was young, maybe 5 or 6 when my mother started teaching me. But I have seen adults learn much faster than children." "You have the advantage of really wanting to learn. That makes all the difference." They worked for an hour, and by the end of it, Natalie could write the entire alphabet, though some letters were shakier than others. Lucas praised her progress and promised to bring a reader the next day, so she could start learning to recognize words. As the days turned into weeks, the evening lessons became the part of Natalie's day she looked forward to most. Lucas was a patient teacher, never frustrated by her mistakes, always ready with encouragement. They started with simple words, and he made her practice writing them over and over until they felt natural. Then he moved on to short sentences, teaching her to sound out unfamiliar words. But it was not just the lessons themselves. It was the way Lucas looked at her when she got something right, the pride in his eyes that made her feel like she had accomplished something remarkable. It was the way he sometimes told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about his father and mother, and the dreams he had for expanding their operation. It was the way his hand would brush hers when he reached for the chalk, sending sparks up her arm that she tried to ignore. She was falling for him. She knew it was foolish, knew that he was her employer and she was just the cook, but she could not seem to help herself. Lucas was kind and smart and hardworking, and when he smiled at her, the whole world seemed brighter. One evening in late October, they were working on a particularly difficult passage from the reader when Lucas suddenly looked up at her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What happened to your father? You mentioned he died, but you never said how." Natalie set down her pencil. She had been dreading this question, but Lucas had been so generous with her that he deserved the truth. "He was shot. He owed money to some men, and when he could not pay, they came to the claim. There was an argument. One of them drew a gun." "Were you there?" "I was in the cabin. I heard the shot, and by the time I got outside, he was already gone. The men told me to clear out before they came back, so I took what I could carry and left." Lucas reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I am sorry. That must have been terrifying. I just kept moving. I was afraid they would come after me, that they would think I had money hidden somewhere. But I guess my father convinced them he had nothing, because no one followed me." "You are safe here," Lucas said firmly. "If anyone comes looking for you, they will have to go through me first." The protective note in his voice made Natalie's heart skip. "Thank you." They sat there for a moment, hands still touching, and Natalie could feel the air between them change, growing charged with something unspoken. Lucas seemed to realize what he was doing and pulled his hand back, clearing his throat. "We should probably call it a night. You have an early morning tomorrow." "Right, of course." But as Natalie walked back to her cabin, she could still feel the warmth of his hand on hers, and she knew that something had shifted between them. The question was what they were going to do about it. November brought cooler weather and the first hints of rain. The ranch was busy with preparations for winter, and Lucas was often out from dawn until dusk, checking on the cattle and making repairs to buildings and fences. But he never missed their evening lessons, even when Natalie could see how exhausted he was. "You do not have to keep doing this," she told him one night. "I know you are busy." "This is important," Lucas said. "Besides, it is the best part of my day." Natalie looked up from her slate, her breath catching. "Really, really?" He held her gaze for a long moment, and Natalie saw something in his eyes that made her pulse race. "Natalie, I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, there was a commotion outside, shouting and the sound of horses. Lucas was on his feet instantly, heading for the door. Natalie followed him out into the yard, where several of the ranch hands were gathered around a man on horseback. "Mr. Keller, we have got trouble," the man said. He was one of the hands who had been out checking the northern pastures. "Found signs of rustlers. Looks like they made off with maybe 20 head of cattle." Lucas swore under his breath. "Show me." He turned to Natalie. "I am sorry I have to deal with this, of course. Be careful." He gave her a quick smile and then was gone, riding off into the darkness with several of the men. Natalie returned to the kitchen, but she could not focus on anything. She kept thinking about what Lucas had been about to say, kept wondering if he felt the same pull she did. It was nearly dawn when Lucas returned, looking tired and frustrated. Natalie had stayed up, unable to sleep, and she met him at the kitchen door with hot coffee. "Did you find them?" "Tracked them for a few miles, but they had too much of a head start. We will try again in the morning when there is more light." He took the coffee gratefully. "You should be sleeping." "So should you." "I will. I just needed to check in first." He drank the coffee in silence, and Natalie could see the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Running the ranch alone was hard work, and moments like this made it even harder. "Lucas, what were you going to say earlier?" Before the interruption, he looked at her, and in the lamplight his eyes were very blue. "I was going to say that I look forward to our lessons every day. That teaching you has made me realize how much I enjoy your company. That somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as just the cook and started thinking of you as someone I cannot imagine this ranch without." Natalie's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "I feel the same way." "I know I should not, that you are my employer and I am just—" "You are not just anything," Lucas interrupted. "You are smart and brave and determined. You have learned more in 2 months than some people learn in 2 years. And when I am with you, I feel like I can talk about anything, like you actually understand what I am trying to do here." "I do understand. You love this ranch. You want to build something that will last, something your father would be proud of." "He would have liked you," Lucas said softly. "He always said the best people were the ones who were not afraid of hard work." They stood there in the kitchen, the dawn beginning to lighten the sky outside, and Natalie knew they had crossed some invisible line. This was not just lessons anymore. This was something deeper, something that scared her as much as it thrilled her. "What happens now?" she asked. "I do not know, but I think we should figure it out together." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Natalie's life. She and Lucas continued their lessons, but now there was an openness between them that had not been there before. He told her about his hopes for the ranch, about wanting to improve the breeding stock and maybe buy some of the adjacent land. She told him about her childhood, about her mother who had died when Natalie was young, and her father's descent into obsession over the mine. They were careful around the other ranch hands, maintaining a professional distance during the day. But in the evenings, when it was just the two of them in the kitchen, they allowed themselves to be honest. Lucas would sit close to her as they worked through the lessons, his shoulder brushing hers. Sometimes he would tuck a loose strand of her hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. And when the lessons ended, they would talk for hours, losing track of time until the cold drove them to their separate beds. December arrived, and with it came rain that turned the roads to mud and made outdoor work miserable. But the kitchen was warm and dry, and Natalie threw herself into preparing hearty meals that would keep the men going through the long, wet days. She also continued her lessons with Lucas, and she could feel her skills improving. She could read simple passages from the newspaper now, and her writing was becoming more confident. One evening, Lucas brought a letter to the kitchen. "This came for me today. Would you like to try reading it?" Natalie took the letter nervously. It was from Lucas's brother in Boston, and the handwriting was neat and precise. She started slowly, sounding out words, and gradually the meaning began to emerge. It was about his studies, about the city, about hoping to visit the ranch next summer. "I did it," Natalie said when she finished, looking up at Lucas with wonder. "I read a whole letter." "You did?" Lucas was beaming at her. "I am so proud of you." On impulse, Natalie threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. Lucas hugged her back, and for a few seconds they just held each other, the letter forgotten on the table. Then Lucas pulled back slightly, his hand still on her waist, and looked down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Natalie," she reached up and kissed him, cutting off whatever he had been about to say. For a moment, Lucas was still, and then he was kissing her back, one hand coming up to cup her face. It was gentle and sweet and perfect, and when they finally broke apart, Natalie was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," she admitted. "Me too." Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "But I did not want to rush you. I know you have been through a lot, and I did not want you to feel pressured." "I do not feel pressured. I feel happy." They kissed again, longer this time, and Natalie felt like something that had been broken inside her was finally starting to heal. Lucas made her feel safe and valued and wanted, and she realized that she was falling completely and irrevocably in love with him. Christmas came, and the ranch hands celebrated with a feast that Natalie and Maria prepared together. Lucas gave Natalie a beautiful leather-bound journal and a fountain pen. "For practicing your writing," he said, "and for recording whatever thoughts you want to keep." Natalie gave him a scarf she had knitted during the rare moments she had free, the wool dyed a deep blue that matched his eyes. "To keep you warm on those long rides," she said. He wore it every day after that, even when it was not particularly cold, and Natalie felt a surge of affection every time she saw it around his neck. Winter deepened, and the lessons continued. Natalie was reading books now, simple novels that Lucas borrowed from neighbors, and she was starting to keep a journal of her own thoughts and observations. Writing was becoming a way to process everything that had happened to her, to make sense of the journey from frightened orphan to confident woman in love. One evening in late January, as they sat by the kitchen fire after a particularly long lesson, Lucas took her hand. "Natalie, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. All right? Do you see a future here? On this ranch, I mean. Or is this just a temporary stop until you figure out what you really want to do?" Natalie looked at their joined hands, at the calluses on his fingers from years of hard work, at the strength and gentleness in his grip. "I see a future here," she said quietly. "If that future includes you, then I cannot imagine wanting to be anywhere else. It does include me. It is all I think about lately, you and me and what we could build together." Lucas squeezed her hand. "I know it has only been a few months, and maybe I should wait longer to say this, but I am not a man who wastes time on things that do not matter. And you matter, Natalie. You matter more than anything. You matter to me too. Then marry me." The words came out in a rush, as if Lucas had been holding them back for too long. "I know I should do this properly, with a ring and a formal proposal, but I cannot wait any longer. I want you to be my wife, to build this ranch together, to spend every evening sitting in this kitchen talking about everything and nothing. What do you say? Natalie felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. Lucas pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly, and Natalie felt like her heart might burst from happiness. She had come to Marysville with nothing, running from a past that had tried to destroy her. And now she had everything she had never dared to dream of: a home, work she was good at, and a man who loved her not despite her past, but because of everything she had overcome. They were married in March, in the small church in Marysville, with Maria and the ranch hands as witnesses. Natalie wore a simple white dress that Maria had helped her sew, and Lucas wore his best suit, the one his father had been married in. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Natalie felt a sense of rightness that went all the way to her bones. They celebrated at the ranch with a feast and music, the hands playing fiddles and guitars while everyone danced in the barn. Lucas held Natalie close as they swayed to the music, and she thought about how much her life had changed in less than a year. She could read and write now, could keep the ranch accounts and order supplies without help. But more importantly, she had found a place where she belonged, a man who saw her as an equal partner, and a future that stretched ahead full of possibility. That night, in the bedroom of the main house that was now theirs, Lucas held her gently, treating her like something precious. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." "I already know," Natalie said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "And I love you too." The years that followed were not always easy. There were droughts that killed the grass and forced them to sell part of the herd. There were harsh winters that tested everyone's endurance. There were illnesses and injuries, and the constant uncertainty that came with depending on the land for survival. But through it all, Natalie and Lucas faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge. Natalie continued to expand her education, reading every book she could get her hands on and teaching herself arithmetic so she could help with the ranch finances. Lucas consulted her on every major decision, valuing her opinion and trusting her judgment. They became known in the area as a formidable team, the kind of people who worked hard and kept their word and helped their neighbors when times were tough. In the spring of 1876, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Lucas on a warm evening in May when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Are you sure?" Lucas asked, his voice filled with wonder. "I am sure. Maria noticed before I did, actually. She said I had the look." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might break. "We are going to have a baby. I cannot believe it. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have given me everything, Natalie. A home, a partnership, and now a family. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Natalie had to give up most of the heavy cooking work in the later months. Maria took over the meals with help from one of the younger ranch hands who turned out to have a talent for baking. Natalie focused on lighter tasks and spent time preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and knitting blankets. Their son was born in December, just before Christmas, during a cold snap that froze the water in the troughs and coated everything in ice. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Natalie was afraid, but Lucas stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Natalie wept with relief and joy. They named him James, after Lucas's father, and from the moment he was born, he became the center of their world. Lucas was a devoted father, staying up to walk with the baby when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just staring at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. "I never knew I could love someone this much," he told Natalie one night as they watched James sleep in his cradle. "I thought what I felt for you was the limit, but now there is this little person, and my heart just keeps expanding." "I know exactly what you mean," Natalie said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It is terrifying and amazing all at once." As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Lucas bought the adjacent property he had been eyeing, expanding their grazing land and allowing them to increase the herd. They built a new barn and hired more hands. Natalie took on more of the bookkeeping, and she discovered she had a head for numbers and negotiations. Suppliers learned that she drove a hard bargain but was always fair, and she earned their respect. In 1879, Natalie gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had Lucas's blue eyes and Natalie's dark hair, and she was a happy, easy baby who rarely cried. James, now almost 3, was fascinated by his little sister and insisted on helping with everything from feeding to changing to entertaining her with his toys. The ranch house was filled with laughter and chaos, and Natalie could not remember ever being happier. She thought sometimes about the frightened girl who had ridden into Marysville on a borrowed mule, with no skills and no prospects and no hope. That girl felt like a stranger now, someone from a different life. This life, with Lucas and their children and the ranch that they were building together, this was real. This was everything she had never known she wanted. One evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Natalie sat at the kitchen table with her journal. She had been keeping it faithfully for years now, recording the daily events of ranch life, her thoughts about the children, and her reflections on how far she had come. Tonight, she wanted to write about something specific. Lucas came in from checking on the horses and found her there, pen in hand. "Writing about your day, writing about you, actually." He raised an eyebrows and sat down across from her. "Should I be worried?" "Not at all." Natalie smiled at him, this man who had taken a chance on an illiterate girl with nothing to offer but a willingness to work hard. "I was just thinking about the night I told you I could not read or write. I was so scared you would fire me, that you would think I was worthless. I never thought that. I know. And instead of judging me, you smiled and said you would teach me. That one decision changed my entire life, Lucas. It gave me skills and confidence and opened up a whole world I never knew existed. But more than that, it gave me you. It gave me this life, this family, this home." Lucas reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "You did the hard work. All I did was point you in the right direction. You did so much more than that. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You saw potential where I only saw failure, and you loved me enough to be patient while I figured out who I was supposed to be." "I loved you from the beginning," Lucas said quietly. "Maybe even that first day when you showed up sunburned and exhausted but too proud to admit you needed help. I saw something in you, Natalie, a strength that you did not even know you had, and every day since then you have proven me right." Natalie set down her pen and walked around the table, settling herself in Lucas's lap the way she had done countless times over the years. He wrapped his arms around her, and they sat there in the quiet kitchen, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. "Do you remember what you said to me once?" Natalie asked. "That teaching me was the best part of your day, I remember. It was the best part of mine, too, not just because I was learning, but because it was time with you. Time when you gave me your complete attention, when we could talk about anything, when I felt like I mattered. You have always mattered. You always will." They sat there for a long time, and Natalie thought about all the moments that had led them to this place. The fear and uncertainty of those first weeks in Marysville. The patience and kindness of those early lessons. The slowly building affection that had turned into love. The decision to commit to each other, to build a life together, to face whatever came as partners. It had not been an easy journey. There had been struggles and setbacks, moments of doubt and fear. But they had weathered it all together, and their love had only grown stronger. Natalie had learned that true strength came not from never failing, but from getting up after you fell. That being brave meant admitting when you needed help. That love was not about grand gestures, but about showing up day after day and choosing each other over and over again. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joy and challenges. In 1882, their third child arrived, another son they named Thomas. He was a wild, energetic child from the start, always getting into trouble and keeping everyone on their toes. James was now 6 and already helping with small chores around the ranch. Rose was 3, sweet and gentle, with a love for animals that suggested she would be a natural rancher. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They weathered a particularly bad drought in 1883 by rotating pastures and carefully managing their water resources. They survived a harsh winter in 1884 that killed several head of cattle but left the core herd intact. Through it all, Natalie and Lucas made decisions together, each trusting the other's judgment and supporting each other through the difficult times. Natalie had become a fixture in the Marysville community. She joined the Church Ladies' Auxiliary and helped organize fundraisers for the new school. She taught basic literacy classes for other women who had never had the opportunity to learn, passing on the gift that Lucas had given her. She was respected and liked, and no one who met her now would ever guess that she had once been the frightened girl who could not even sign her own name. In the spring of 1885, Lucas's brother finally made the trip west to visit the ranch. Michael Keller was a successful lawyer in Boston, polished and educated, and at first Natalie worried that he would look down on her rough Western background. But Michael was warm and genuine, delighted with his nieces and nephews, and impressed by what Lucas and Natalie had built together. "My brother always had a good head for business," Michael told Natalie one evening after the children were in bed. "But it is clear that you are a full partner in this enterprise. He could not have done it without you." "We have done it together," Natalie said. "That is the secret. Neither of us trying to control everything, but working as a team. My wife and I try to operate the same way. It is not always easy, especially in a city like Boston where people have very fixed ideas about what a wife should and should not do. But I think the modern marriage is a partnership, not a dictatorship." Natalie liked Michael, and she was glad that Lucas had family who supported their choices. When Michael left at the end of his 2-week visit, he made them promise to bring the children to Boston someday so his own family could meet them. "I will hold you to that," Lucas said, shaking his brother's hand. "Rose is already asking about trains and big cities. I think we will have to take that trip eventually." Life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. The children grew older, taking on more responsibilities and learning the skills they would need to run the place someday. James showed a natural talent for working with horses, able to calm even the most skittish animals with patience and gentle handling. Rose, as predicted, loved everything about ranching and was often found in the barn before dawn, helping feed and care for the livestock. Thomas was still young, but he followed his older siblings everywhere, determined to keep up despite his shorter legs. Natalie and Lucas watched their children grow with pride and occasional bittersweet awareness that these years were passing too quickly. They made sure to savor the moments. Family dinners around the big kitchen table, evenings spent reading together in the parlor, Sunday picnics down by the creek. They taught the children to work hard but also to appreciate the beauty around them, to treat animals with kindness, and to keep their word once given. As the 1880s drew to a close, Natalie sometimes took out her old journal and read through the entries from those early years. The story of her transformation still amazed her. From illiterate orphan to confident ranch wife and mother, from scared girl to strong woman. And at the center of it all was Lucas, the lonely cowboy who had smiled at her confession and offered to teach her, never knowing that he was offering so much more than just literacy. On their 10th wedding anniversary in March 1885, Lucas surprised Natalie with a gift. It was a small wooden sign, beautifully carved and painted, that read Keller Ranch established 1862, Lucas and Natalie Keller, proprietors. I had it made in Sacramento, Lucas explained. I wanted something that would show this is our ranch, not just mine. We are partners in this, and I want the whole world to know it. Natalie ran her fingers over the carved letters, over her own name permanently recorded alongside his. 10 years ago, she could not have read these words, could not have written her own name. Now it was displayed proudly at the entrance to their property, a declaration of everything they had built together. "It is perfect," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." They hung the sign that afternoon with all 3 children watching excitedly. James wanted to know why Mommy was crying if she was happy, and Rose declared that the sign was beautiful. Even Thomas, at only 3 years old, seemed to understand that this was an important moment. That evening, after the children were asleep, Natalie and Lucas sat on the porch as they had done so many times over the years. The California night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. "Do you ever think about where we would be if things had happened differently?" Natalie asked. "If I had not come to Marysville, or if you had not been hiring, or if I had been too proud to admit I could not read." "Sometimes," Lucas admitted. "But I think we would have found our way to each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be. I used to not believe in fate. I thought life was just random chance, good luck and bad luck with no pattern or purpose. But meeting you changed my mind. There was something about that moment when I confessed my secret and you smiled at me. Something clicked into place, like the world saying, yes, this is right. I felt it too. I was planning to hire whoever could cook decently, but when you walked up to the house that day, something told me you were special. And I was right." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked between them, watching the night deepen. Natalie thought about all the nights they had spent like this, talking through problems and celebrating victories, and simply enjoying each other's company. She thought about the lessons in the kitchen that had turned into something so much more. She thought about the family they had created, the legacy they were building for their children. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For seeing me. For believing in me. For teaching me not just to read and write, but to believe in myself. For loving me enough to wait while I figured things out. For making me a partner instead of just a wife. For everything." Lucas lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for trusting me, for having the courage to be vulnerable, for working so hard to learn. For building this life with me, for being the best mother our children could ask for everything." The stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of time in their slow, eternal dance. Below them, the ranch slept, the cattle settled in the pastures and the horses quiet in the barn. Inside the house, their children dreamed their child dreams, safe and loved and full of possibilities. And on the porch, Natalie and Lucas held each other close, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They had come so far from that first evening in the kitchen, from that moment of confession and offered help. They had built something real and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. The years continued their steady march. The children grew into teenagers, and then young adults, each finding their own path while remaining connected to the ranch that was their foundation. James eventually took over most of the day-to-day operations, allowing Lucas to step back slightly and enjoy his grandchildren when they started arriving. Rose married a neighboring rancher and started her own spread with her husband, staying close enough for frequent visits. Thomas surprised everyone by developing an interest in law like his Uncle Michael, and he eventually went east to study, before returning to California to practice. Through it all, Natalie and Lucas remained each other's rock. They weathered the challenges of aging together with the same partnership that had defined their marriage from the beginning. Lucas taught Natalie to ride better, and she taught him to enjoy the simple pleasure of sitting still and reading a good book. They traveled occasionally, taking that promised trip to Boston to visit Michael and exploring other parts of California. But they always came home to the ranch, to the land they had shaped with their own hands and the legacy they had built together. When Natalie was in her 60s, a young woman came to the ranch looking for work. She was thin and scared, with haunted eyes that reminded Natalie of herself all those years ago. They hired her as a kitchen assistant, and Natalie took her under her wing, teaching her not just to cook, but to manage a household and keep accounts. One day, the young woman confessed tearfully that she could not read or write. Natalie smiled, an echo of the smile Lucas had given her so many years before, and said gently, "Then I will teach you." And she did, passing on the gift that had transformed her own life. She taught the young woman her letters and sounds, patiently correcting mistakes and celebrating progress. She shared her own story, about arriving in Marysville with nothing and learning that it was never too late to change your life. And when the young woman eventually left to start her own journey, Natalie knew that the cycle would continue, that the kindness Lucas had shown her was rippling outward in ways they could never fully measure. On a warm spring evening in 1912, when Natalie was 60 years old and had been married to Lucas for 27 years, they sat on the porch watching the sunset as they had done countless times before. Their grandchildren played in the yard, their voices high and happy. Inside, their daughter-in-law was preparing supper, the smells of cooking drifting through the open windows. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked suddenly. "Staying here, I mean. You could have gone anywhere, done anything once you learned to read." Natalie looked at him, at the silver in his hair and the lines around his eyes, at the hands that had held hers through joy and sorrow. "Not for a single second. This is where I belong. With you, with our family, with this land we have built together. Everything I ever wanted was right here." "I feel the same way." Lucas squeezed her hand gently. "You made everything better, Natalie. Not just the ranch, but my whole life. I was so lonely before you came. I did not even realize how lonely until you filled all the empty spaces." "We filled them together," Natalie corrected gently. "That is what marriage is, I think. Two people helping each other become whole." They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The grandchildren were called in for supper, their protests floating on the evening air. The ranch settled into its nightly routine, animals fed and secured, buildings locked up tight. Natalie thought about the long road that had brought her here, about the girl who had fled into the night with nothing but fear and determination. She thought about that first meal she had cooked for the ranch hands, about Lucas appearing in the kitchen to ask her to make a list she could not write. She thought about his smile, about the gentleness in his eyes, about the moment she had realized she was falling in love. Every decision had led to this moment, to this life, to this quiet evening sitting next to the man who had changed everything. And if she could go back and tell that frightened girl anything, it would be this: keep going. Do not give up. The best is yet to come. Love is waiting just around the corner, in the form of a lonely cowboy who will see you, truly see you, and offer not just to teach you to read, but to share his whole life with you. I love you, Natalie said, leaning her head on Lucas's shoulder. I love you too, he replied, his arm coming around her. Always have, always will. And there, on the porch of the ranch they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life and enduring love, Natalie Drake Keller felt completely and perfectly at peace. She had come so far, overcome so much, and found everything she needed in the process. The girl who could not read or write had become a woman who could do anything, and it had all started with a confession, a smile, and a simple promise: "Then I will teach you." The evening deepened into night, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. Inside, their family gathered around the table for the meal, laughter and conversation filling the air. And outside, Natalie and Lucas sat together in the gathering darkness, hands linked, hearts intertwined, grateful for every moment that had brought them to this place, to this life, to each other. Their story had begun with words unwritten and a kindness freely given. It had grown into a love that weathered every storm and celebrated every triumph. And it would endure, in the ranch they had built, in the children they had raised, in the countless lives they had touched with their generosity and faith in human potential. This was their legacy, not just the land or the cattle or the buildings, but the simple truth that love and patience could transform lives, that it was never too late to learn, to grow, to become something more than you thought possible. That two people working together could achieve far more than one person alone. That kindness mattered, that education mattered, that seeing the potential in others and helping them reach it was perhaps the most important work anyone could do. Natalie had learned to read and write all those years ago, but Lucas had taught her so much more than that. He had taught her to trust, to hope, to believe in herself. He had taught her that love was not just passion but partnership, not just feeling but action. He had taught her that she was worthy of respect and consideration, that her opinions mattered, that she had value beyond her ability to work. And in return, she had taught him that vulnerability was strength, that asking for help was not weakness, that two people truly committed to each other could build something that would last for generations. She had brought warmth and laughter into his lonely life, had filled his house with children and love, had been his partner in every sense of the word. Together, they had created something beautiful from the broken pieces they had started with. And as they sat on the porch that evening, surrounded by the life they had built, they knew that every struggle had been worth it, every challenge overcome had made them stronger, every moment of doubt had been answered with renewed commitment. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of grass and earth and the promise of rain. The grandchildren's voices faded as they settled down for the meal. The ranch was at peace, as it had been for nearly 40 years under Natalie and Lucas's stewardship. "We should go in," Lucas said eventually. "They will be wondering where we are." "In a minute," Natalie replied. "I just want to sit here a little longer." So they sat, in no hurry to move, content to simply be together in the place they loved. And when they finally did go inside, joining their family around the table, they carried with them the quiet certainty that they had lived well, loved deeply, and built something that would endure long after they were gone. This was their happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending where everything was perfect, but a real and honest life full of work and love and the daily choice to show up for each other. It was in the small moments, the shared glances across a crowded room, the gentle touch of hands as they passed each other in the hall, the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely and loved what they found. And it all began with a confession, a smile, and 5 simple words that changed everything. "Then I will teach you." Those words had opened a door to a future neither of them could have imagined, a future full of love and partnership and the quiet joy of building a life together. They had taken a chance on each other, that lonely cowboy and the frightened young woman, and they had created something extraordinary from that leap of faith. As the years rolled on, and they grew older together, their love only deepened. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. They watched the ranch continue to thrive under James's management, saw Rose's own spread flourish, celebrated Thomas's success as a lawyer. They had achieved what every couple hopes for, a life well lived, a love that endured, and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And when, many years later, they were laid to rest side by side in the small cemetery outside Marysville, their headstone bore a simple inscription: Lucas and Natalie Keller, beloved partners in life and love. The words were clean and clear, etched deeply into the stone, a testament to a woman who had learned to read and write and had used those skills to build an extraordinary life, and to the man who had believed in her enough to teach her, to love her, and to walk beside her every step of the way. Their story lived on in the memories of those who knew them, in the thriving ranch that still bore their names, in the literacy programs Natalie had started that continued to help others find their voice. It lived on in every act of kindness, every offer to help, every moment when someone chose to see potential in another person and took the time to nurture it. And somewhere, in the eternal evening of memory, they were still sitting on that porch together, hands linked, hearts intertwined, watching the sun set over the land they loved, grateful beyond measure for the day a frightened woman confessed her secret and a lonely cowboy smiled and changed both their lives forever with a simple promise to teach her. That promise had been the beginning of everything, the first step on a journey that had brought them more joy than either had thought possible. And that, truly, was the greatest lesson of all.